Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this August 10th, 2015 day on our calendar. I took a week off last week on the Investigative Journal. You can listen to my show live every evening, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And, you take a week off and you kind of lose your flow, so to speak. You get a radio flow if you do it every day. And it takes a little bit of time. It's kind of like if you're a baseball player and you take a week off, you got to get that batting swing back. And so you have to go into those batting cages and get your swing back. So that's basically what this show is. I'm in the batting cage getting my swing back, so to speak, so that I can broadcast daily on a regular basis. But anyway, this is part 15 of In Search of the Great Ice Wall. And many people wonder what that really means. Well, what it means is that in the last year or so, there's been over a 600 to 700% increase in traffic on the internet regarding whether the Earth is round or whether it is a disc shape, plane, with an ice wall surrounding it. Now, many of you may think that sounds a bit crazy, but in my thinking, when you look at many things that have happened in this fantasy world we live in, it's really not that crazy when you consider that throughout the course of history, this idea has more followers than the present-day idea, which is really only a couple generations old. We're not going to go back to the occult and Copernicus and all those theories, and then why the Vatican decided to switch from flat earthers to global earthers, and now they have big telescopes named Lucifer and the whole shot. We're not going to go into that. But on a whole, if you look back at the recorded history, more people believed that it was flat when it was round. And then NASA took over, and with the help of technology, with the help of the Nazis, with the help of, let's just say modern man, they've really shaped the thinking patterns of most people. Well, I'm kind of funny in that regard, but I'm kind of tired of living in a fantasy land. When you step foot on any part of the globe today, it is nothing but a big fantasy. And what really happens is a lot of the things, when you start talking in these terms, most people are going to look at you and go, oh boy, this guy's really off his rocker. But when you start really checking the facts out, most people, I think, are off their rockers for believing anything that comes out of the mouth of the Vatican or the government. For example, two things that people widely believe. Many of the 1 billion followers of who I'd like to call Mr. Pope believe that Mother Mary comes down and talks to them, and there are apparitions and visions, and she's actually comes to this earth. Okay. Then in the secular world, many people believe in the government story about 9/11. Now, how anybody can believe that is beyond me. But those are the same people that say members of the International Flat Earth Society or the Flat Earth Society, or anybody who even wants to check out that notion, was really off their rocker. But anyway, what is it that drives this so-called increase in interest? I mean, you go all over the internet now, and everybody is out there trying to prove or disprove NASA. Now, I've looked in this thing for hundreds of hours and have come to the conclusion that NASA is hiding something so big. I mean, you cannot believe, I never did believe, and I did many stories over the years in the past on the fake moon landings, but it goes farther than that. And when you start looking at everything they've done, I think it's one big hoax. And so what are they? They have to be covering up something. Then you look at the Antarctic Treaty, and then you realize that every part of this so-called circle Earth, and you look at old maps, which are not always reliable, but let's just look at it in terms of North Pole being in the center of the, like, think of a record player. You know, in those old records, maybe some of you still remember before digital sound came in. You know, I had to put it on a phonograph, and there was a disc. Well, think of the North Pole as in the middle, and then the ice ring being the outside of the record, the 33 1/3 album. And that each part of that ice ring is strangely protected today by 64 countries. Now, they don't admit that there's an ice ring, but when you start thinking about it, you go down anywhere trying to get to that. There's about 3 locations that are well protected, and when you look at this, every part of that ice wall is protected so that you can't get there. There's a treaty amongst nations who are always fighting amongst each other, all the Middle East nations included. China, Russia, America, they're all in agreement to keep people out of Antarctica, which they've told us erroneously is on the bottom of the ball, which can't be, at least according to my thinking. So in those terms, I started really looking at it, and I started thinking to myself, all right, what's really going on here? And so, not being of a scientific mind, so to speak, although, you know what, if I had to do it all over again, I think I'd be an astronomer. Keeping your heads in the clouds, so to speak, because, you know, most people's heads are in the clouds, thanks to, you know, technology. Modern man has become nothing more than a puppet of everything they want you to listen to. For example, the crazy, crazy presidential elections going on now. If people are going to believe that they have a choice, that the left and right are really different, and have no idea what the Hegelian dialectic is, then go right ahead and be distracted with Donald Trump and all these things that go on. You know, the news, they spend so much time on important things, like what Donald Trump said about Megyn Kelly, and spending hours and hours and days and days and days. This is distraction. You have to understand the Hegelian dialectic at work. And that means they always have 2 opposing theories. You have, in the case of politics, the left and the right constantly fighting and grabbing you to be a part of it. Some of you are on the left, some of you are on the right, some of you, of course, but that's, you know, the majority. And you can state the reason they do that is because the left, and now, if you don't understand Hegelian dialectic, you think you have a choice, but you don't, because they have the left and the right causing friction constantly, and whatever happens, they have a thesis. So it's the left fighting the right, and whoever wins basically is creating their synthesis for what they want. And if you look at wars, it's the same thing. They orchestrate wars. They believe there's a good and a bad side, but if you control them from the top, you can have the outcome you choose. And so I believe all wars have been orchestrated. I've talked about it many times. The real masterminds behind this are the Vatican Jesuit Order, who have been orchestrating wars for hundreds of years, and lend their intelligence, lend their ability to play out and cause friction between the Hegelian dialectic, you know, using the Hegelian dialectic to their advantage. And I believe the same thing's going on here in this discussion of this so-called ultimate conspiracy theory. Now, I take on most all of them. Being a journalist, I decided, a long time ago, I was a bit suspect on what the government was saying, but the more I learned, the more I realized that you have to uncover every stone, test everything, before you can get to the truth. And isn't it, what's that old saying? A closed-minded person only believes in what he thinks is right, but an open-minded person believes, or at least thinks and believes in everybody's theory so that he may one day get to the truth, or at least entertains everybody's ideas. So the point I'm trying to make is, in this flat earth situation, after hundreds of hours of looking at it, I've come to the conclusion that there must be a reason the powers that be want this to be in the public mind, want this to be out in the open now, want people to start thinking about it. Now, one, of course, it's a distraction, but anything like this is always headed up by COINTEL operators who get out there to lead the way. Now, there's been about 3 or 4 people who've led the way in this flat earth discussion that I found out. One is Matt Boylan, who is from Canada, claims to be to have worked as a 1099 contractor for NASA and knows the real truth. Now, you can't deny that NASA is fraudulently doing so many things with computer-generated images. But then there's people out there who say Boylan is a COINTEL operator. Then there's people out there who say, no, he's the real deal. My thinking is, I don't care what he is, because you can always use information no matter what, and I have really no proof. And some people say, well, he has to be because he's from a Jesuit school. And I said, no, he doesn't, because I'm from a Catholic school as well, and a Holy Cross Father Notre Dame school. Does that make me a, COINTEL operator? Well, some people may say yes. Some people may say no. So I say it's really not important. Now, there's another guy out there named Eric Dubé, who's a New Ager, claims to live in Thailand. He's written a book about this, and he seems to have drawn a lot of attention from several other people who claim that he is a COINTEL operator. Now, he also in turn claims the other one, that Matt Boylan is. So you have this friction going on. Now, some people claim that he's taken all the information in his book and plagiarized it, etc., etc. But then again, some people also say he doesn't even live in Thailand. I don't, so the real question is he or isn't he a COINTEL? I say it's really not important. Take the information you can and move forward. Now, the idea that one of those two is and one isn't important either, because I've seen it firsthand. I remember when I was broadcasting for Republic Broadcasting and Genesis Broadcasting, which Alex Jones is on, John Stadtmiller running Republic, they were always fighting. But I came to understand they're both on the same team and COINTEL. But I don't really care. Now, I know they are because I work there. But I also say it's not that important, whether you think they are or not. Now, they call me a COINTEL operator because that's what they do. So many people believe that I am. So I say it's really not important whether they are, whether Alex Jones is or not. The important thing is to listen to their information and then make up your own mind on what's important and what isn't. And don't let yourself go down your wrong rabbit hole. So it's not uncommon that two of them may be fighting and being on both COINTEL, or none of them, or one of the above. Now, there's another guy named Mark Sargent who also, I believe, has Jesuit connection, and the same goes for him. And then there's another guy named Jeranism, and he's a supposed... Now, I don't know if Mark Sargent's Jesuit connected or not. There's a site that brings up these guys' past and their backgrounds. Then there's a guy named Jeranism, and he supposedly has different names, and he's from Italy. Now, the point is, they all could be, one of them could be, two of them could be, three of them could be COINTEL, or none of them. My little addition to this whole subject is it doesn't matter. And I don't care whether they are or they aren't. I'm going to listen and take the information, because the real important question here, which none of them have dealt with, which I think is important, and ask yourself why they haven't dealt with this, is why would the powers that be, knowing the control they have, want this information out to the public the way it's just snowball. Millions of people catching this, listening to this now. And a number of people, many people changing their views about the earth we live on. Now, my question to you is, why would they want that out in the open? Now, I'm convinced that every truth movement, from 9/11 to Waco to anyone you can think of, even the anti-Jesuit movement, anti-Vatican movement, which has grown. I've seen it grown when I first started talking about it almost 10 years ago. No one was talking about this. Then I looked back and said, there were people in the 80s, some in the 90s. Then in 2001, it changed, and then it blossomed, and now many people understand the Vatican's true role. Now, I said that this would never have gained such popularity unless they wanted people to believe it, to listen to it. And and secondly, then they had to put their boys in there to control it, just like they control every other truth movement. So then I said, well, who are the people in the anti-Jesuit movement? And I said, it really doesn't matter. I've mentioned some names before, and I've also mentioned it doesn't matter whether they are or they aren't. What matters is you listen to the information, and you don't let them take you down the wrong rabbit hole. You figure out what is the right rabbit hole. Now, the question becomes, let's talk. I'm going to give you what I think is the reason in the second half hour of why the powers that be want this information into the public eye now, want people to start thinking about it again. Now, first of all, I believe they know the earth is flat. I believe they've been hiding it for a long time for a reason. And there are many reasons, but there are a couple major ones. And I'm going to get to that in the second half hour, but let's look again. Now, remember, let's look a little bit at this theory so you understand where I'm coming from. People that are catching on are saying, wait a minute, the Earth it can't be a planet because it looks and feels flat. So they deem all evidence to the contrary, such as satellite photos, things like that. But are there really satellites out there? That's another question. And have you really checked out NASA? Now, I don't believe anything that comes out of NASA's mouth or government agencies or the Vatican's mouth, so you start looking into it yourself. Now, the belief that the possibility that the Earth is flat has been described, like I said, as the ultimate conspiracy theory. And you can understand why without me giving you a long explanation. Now, according to people who believe in this, its ranks have grown over the last few years by millions and by many more they're looking at since 2009. But I'm looking at the last year when it's really been out there. Judging by this effort and judging by why the powers that be want this information out there, you have to ask, many people will say, are people really serious about this? Well, yes. Yes, and I think NASA is serious about covering it up. Look at the major theory is this, that the Earth is a disk with the Arctic or the North Pole in the middle, and Antarctica to be in a 150 tall ice wall. It's there is a 150 tall ice wall surrounding the entire disk, and what's on the other side is unknown. Now, the day and night cycle is explained by positing that the sun and moon are spheres measuring about 32 miles in diameter and about 3,000 miles away above the plane. And the stars basically move in a plane 3,100 miles up, maybe a bit higher, and they're like spotlights. And these celestial spheres illuminate different portions of the planet in a 24-hour cycle. The theory also says that gravity is an illusion. doesn't exist. And the theory of relativity by Einstein was basically something, that is such an interesting subject. Because, you see, in previous shows, I've talked to you about many things, experiments you can do to show, to kind of talk about, to prove that, hey, this could, these people that believe in the flat earth could be on the right track. And then there are many signs and symbols that the powers that be are covering it up, etc. But looking at the scientific area, this might be the time. I always kind of change things midstream as I'm talking. But this may be the time. Let me see how much time I got in this. I only got a few minutes. But this may be the time to, excuse me, to talk about geocentrism and what you're not told about some of the science behind this. And I'm talking about speed of light, theory of relativity, what the ether is or isn't, and if you don't know that term. So I'm going to do about 14 or 15 minute video here called Geocentrism, What You're Not Told. And it's a purely scientific look. It may get a little boring, but I think it's invaluable that you understand a couple things, what Einstein was really all about, what they're covering up, and a couple experiments that are always hidden from you and hidden from young physics students and twisted, so to speak. And there has to be a reason for all this. And I think, to me, this was one of the final elements to really say, wow, they really have been good at deceiving us. And like Mark Twain says, it's easy to deceive people, but much harder to tell people and to convince people they've been deceived. So that's why I'm using the flat earth theory. Now, I'm not going to forget that I'm going to tell you the reasoning behind why I believe this issue is being brought to the forefront now. And it has to do with the Pope coming on the 23rd of September to speak to Congress. I thought we did have a separation of church and state in this country, but in the case of the Vatican, that doesn't apply. Because I'll tell you, a long time ago, they have controlled this country from the beginning. Our founding fathers were in their pocket. We've presented shows showing that. And it's not changed, but only gotten worse over the course of 200 and whatever years we've been around. And it's coming right now to, on the 23rd, you're going to see it really come to fruition when the Pope gives his marching orders to Congress and the President of the United States, who's nothing more than one of his puppets. And this issue, I believe, is going to be important. And I'm going to tell you why at the end of the next half hour, after I show you a 15-minute boring scientific look at geocentrism and what you're not told. And I might add, the boat, remember I was taking a boat trying to find that ice wall? I've named it geocentricity. Yep, that's it. And, later on in the year, I'll explain to you the size of the boat, what it looks like, where we're cruising, and get back to you right after this 3-minute break on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, part 15 of In Search of the Great Ice Wall. This is the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. And, people ask me, why do you like living on a boat? And I said, well, at times it gets a little bit rocky, but it is my way of showing that I don't want to set foot on 1 inch of this fantasy world for at least I can get off of it for the hours I'm on the boat and on the ocean. Then they'll say, there's the international waters, and the water that you're on is controlled by the state or the United States, and there is no free place even on the ocean. And technically, they're probably right. As I told you in past shows, when the Fish and Game pulled my boat over and took me back to shore because I had a few extra fish on there I was trying to eat, and I told them I was on my way to search for the Great Ice Wall, and they thought I was crazy, wanted me to see a psychiatrist or go to a mental institution, and I told them I would do that on your dime. And then they backed away. Of course, they like getting money from you. All these stupid laws and fines are geared for nothing more than getting into your pocketbook. And I told you, I love every day seeing how many of these stupid laws I can break. I mean, there are certain ones I don't. I don't like, the major ones. I don't go around breaking those. But the little ones, like jaywalking at 6 in the morning, is a crime. Give me a break. Or, screwing the parking meter lady over. I don't like paying. I don't put money in parking meters. And I try to see how much I can get away with. Yes, and I try to break at least 3 of these stupid laws every day. And I'm pretty successful. And there's a lot of other little ones that make absolutely no sense to me, and they're there just geared to get into your pocketbook, and I like sticking it to the man, so to speak. But anyway, that's me. So anyway, here's the deal. At least to me, it is a symbolic gesture that the whole of mankind is being used to create a false reality. And the false reality begins with the powers that be that want you to believe something that is entirely fantasy. Now, the real interesting thing is if they can get the masses to do that, it becomes reality. And that's what we live in. And I can tell you that when you really start researching it, the whole thing's a fantasy. So living on a boat is my symbolic gesture that I get off of that fantasy world, the land they've created, and I'm on the water. Well, that's it. But anyway, I'm sure you're not that interested, and I promise to play for you that boring scientific discussion of geocentrism and what you're not told, and it's going to explain a little bit about heliocentrism and some of the real interesting things that have been kept from you. So let's go to that right now and see what we can find out. And it opens up. It's like intro. And it's what I wanted to talk about is the science supporting geocentrism hidden from view. Interesting. What has been hidden from you? You know, most people aren't aware that by the turn of the 20th century, leading physicists were confronted by the fact that the evidence showed the Earth was not in motion. I didn't learn about that when I was in school. They just stuck a globe on my desk and said, that's what you live on, and you live on that one. And I said, well, why didn't I fall off? Why aren't students of physics ever told about this exciting upset in science? I know, because they want to cover it up. Wolfgang Ernst Pauli, 1900-1958, physicist, pioneer, said this. Speaking on the Michelson-Morley experiments, he referred to the failure of many attempts to measure terrestrially any effects of the Earth's motion. Michelson-Morley experiments, very important. Remember this. Then there's Henry Poincaré, mathematician and physicist, died in 1912. A great deal of research, he said, has been carried out concerning the influence of the Earth's movement. The results were always negative. He wrote that in Science and Hypothesis, 1901. Poincaré and other physicists were referring to the Michelson-Morley experiments, the same experiments that gatekeepers will tell you had no relevance to implications of a non-moving Earth. Omission, remember, is the name of the game, not truth. Though we know that. Now listen to this guy telling you something.
That completely transformed physics. At many people's top of the list would have to be the Michelson-Morley experiment.
In the 19th century, physicists thought that since sound waves travel through air, light waves must travel through some sort of medium as well. They called this theoretical medium ether.
The famous luminiferous ether. This magical medium that was hypothesized to be what light required to move through the vacuum of space, just the way sound requires air to move from one place to another. How else could waves of light move through the vacuum of space unless there was some medium there, some hypothetical medium? Let's call it the ether.
Ether, they theorized, is an invisible nothingness that permeates the universe. Its only physical property is that it allows light to propagate through it. But once precise measurements of the speed of light became possible, testing the predicted effects of ether on the speed of light became possible as well. The Earth orbits the Sun at about 66,500 miles per hour. If light travels through ether, they reasoned, then as the Earth moves through the ether, the speed of light should be different going with the ether than perpendicular to it. In an attempt to show the effects of ether on the speed of light, Albert Michelson and Edward Morley conducted an experiment in 1887 at what is now Case Western Reserve University.
Michelson was an expert in optical experiments, and he thought that he could devise an experiment where one would be able to see the slight difference in the speed of light measured on the Earth if you measured it along the direction of the motion of the Earth and at right angles to it. There should be a slight difference.
Compared to the speed of light, Earth is not moving that fast. So if you're going to check the difference in the speed of light measured with the movement of the Earth compared with transverse to it, you need a level of precision that no one had before. The Michelson interferometer was just such an apparatus.
Michelson and Morley devised an apparatus that would detect minute differences in speed between two beams of light. Light from one source is split into two directions through a half-silvered mirror. These beams are bounced between other mirrors and then recombined back into a single beam. When two light beams combine, if their waves are completely synchronized, the peaks combine to make an even more intense peak. If they are one half wavelength off, their peaks combine and cancel out the intensity. Slight differences in speed between two light waves will therefore produce a pattern based on the amount of interference between the two beams. This is known as an interference pattern. Examining the interference pattern from the two light beams sent out in different directions would clearly show if the speed of each light beam were different in different directions. But Michelson and Morley never detected such a difference. Their results were inconsistent with the existence of ether.
The scientific world didn't know what to make of it.
So anyway, let me just break in here. So what Michelson and Morley did, which is completely ignored today, well, not completely. They had to bring in Albert Einstein. We'll see that in the future, too. Though his only reason for being was to discredit this theory and create the theory of relativity to confuse everyone, and that's why he received all those accolades. But Michelson and Morley actually showed the Earth cannot be moving based on their theory of ether. Back to the video.
The famous scientists in Europe, all Lord Rayleigh and Lord Kelvin and Lord Thomson, were saying, hey, come on, you must have done something wrong here. There has to be an ether. And the whole thing didn't get resolved until many, many years later when Einstein came along.
Einstein's theory of special relativity proposed that the speed of light is always the same, regardless of the speed of the light source. The results of the Michelson-Morley experiment were entirely consistent with Einstein's view of the universe, and this served as the turning point in modern physics.
The Michelson-Morley experiment was an experimental advance in technology that transformed science. Not only physics, but science.
Now the question becomes, why won't they tell you? Well, what they won't tell you is that there was one other explanation for the experiment's result. That the Earth really isn't in motion. Interesting. This is the crux of their deception. Any relevance to a non-moving Earth is kept hidden, even though past physicists admitted the implications. In the 1950s, science historian Bernard Jaffe stated in his book, Michelson and the Speed of Light, listen to what he stated. The data were almost unbelievable. There was only one other possible conclusion to draw, that the Earth was at rest. So, what's the big secret? Why? Why the big secret? Geocentrism is a heresy to the Church of Enlightenment. It cannot be allowed into the debate. It is forbidden. That's been the secret. But why? Getting back to my question, do they want to uncover the secret now? What is the reason behind it? And before we continue on, let me tell you very simply what it is. You've heard of one world government that they've told you they're going to create. You've heard of the one world religion they're going to create. Now, the government and science couldn't do this alone. They need, the Vatican, and the Vatican's lies and its manipulation and its great ability to deceive. And I believe that they will use this theory in the end, along with the Vatican coming to the rescue, so to speak, creating the Antichrist, or in the terms of most people, they'll think it's the Messiah, whatever you want to call it, Maitreya or whatever. After the chaos comes down the Antichrist. In fact, what he'll say is that, see, look at the evil people, what they've done to you. They've created a false reality, a false world. And we're telling you the truth. The earth is flat. There's a beautiful place that we're going to create for you, the remaining people. Yes. Now, what have they done? They double talk just like they always do. They created flat, they created round, now they want it flat, and they're going to do it and say they're doing it to protect you, and the evil people now have been destroyed. When in fact they're the evil people all along, and you're going to follow the evil people to wherever they want you to go. And that's the reason now, I believe, that they will use this theory along with their Antichrist coming to save the day. After the big chaos and the murders and the wars they've created to create what they really want in the end, a one world government and one world religion bonded together to control you. So, geocentrism contradicts centuries of this kind of illuminist orthodoxy to remove absolute order from the universe and put all things in motion, relative, in a state of perpetual change. That's what they've been doing for a long time now. Before, they were on the side of the flat earth. Then they decided to get everybody to believe this illuminist theory. Now, I think the reason that they've brought this up is because they want to use it in the end for their advantage. Because they've known all along that the earth is flat. We live in the age of reason, remember this. And do you really think they'd allow the cornerstone of their religion to be questioned until they want you to question it because they want to use it to their own advantage? Think of that. Oh, and you look throughout the ages and you see the hypocrisy. All the deceptions they've created, the wars that they've inflicted, the false sense of freedoms, and all of their signs and symbols showing you otherwise of who they really are. And do you think that this is just a coincidence now? That everybody's talking about the flat earth? I think not. And isn't it interesting? All those Masonic symbols you see in the astronauts, and all that craziness, and all the things that want you to believe when it's actually not true at all. But it is, because we've created their reality, their false reality. And we'll continue to do that as the Masons hold hands and give you all these signs and symbols on these coins. Look at NASA's symbol, Apollo 16, the eagle. Now, it's amazing. So how did they escape the evidence pointing to a non-moving Earth for all these years? Well, NASA was a part of it. But remember, Albert Einstein. Are you starting to get why Einstein achieved unparalleled celebrity status, the cover of the century on Time magazine? You know why? Because he saved Enlightenment thinkers from geocentrism at the point they didn't want you to know yet. Einstein did this by promoting a theory which allowed physicists to dismiss unwelcome evidence of the Michelson-Morley experiments. That was his reason for being. They didn't want you to know yet. Now they want you to know. And they have to want you to know for their benefit. But since Einstein's relativity has been sacrosanct, what has happened? Think about Ernest Mach. The other big secret they keep from you is Mach's principle and how it relates to the phenomena like the Coriolis effect. Now let's look into see what this is.
Rotation, winds and ocean currents would flow in the direction of initial movement. But because the Earth spins, all free-moving objects, including masses of air, are deflected from their original direction of motion. This is called the Coriolis effect. Imagine an object launched from the North Pole toward the target on the equator. From the vantage point of the target, the object appears to be deflected. Now the flight is reversed. The object has a velocity component to the right imparted at the point of origin. The object traces a curved path to the right. Now the object is launched toward a target rotating along with the point of origin on the same parallel. The object appears to be deflected from the initial path. Deflection increases as the object covers more ground. In the southern hemisphere, rotation is clockwise when viewed from over the South Pole. The effect is to deflect objects to the left from the direction of initial movement, as shown by an object launched from the pole. Again, the leftward velocity component imparted to the object from its point of origin carries it left with respect to the target. With the object and target rotating along the same parallel, flight does not follow the parallel, but an arc of circumference. As the flight changes latitude, it is progressively diverted to the left. In summary, the Coriolis effect causes objects in the northern hemisphere to be diverted to the right, as viewed from the direction of original movement. This applies to flights regardless of direction. In the southern hemisphere, the deflection is to the left. The only motions not subject to Coriolis deflection are east and west motions along the equator.
Now, Ernst Mach showed that the mass of the stars in space have just as much inertial effect on the Earth as do local forces. Now remember this, nothing can exist in a vacuum. Everything is governed by a large-scale structure and mass of the universe itself. There's a type of physical relativity known as Mach's principle that Einstein himself believed in. Listen to this, though. Einstein writes to Mach in 1923, "It turns out that the inertia originates in a kind of interaction between bodies. If one rotates a heavy shell of matter, a Coriolis force arises in the interior of the shell. That is, the plane of the pendulum is dragged around." Now just wait. If you feel a little confused, don't worry. It's very easily explained. And the explanation is simple. This is why Mach's principle is code for geocentrism, not heliocentrism. Mach's principle explains how a rotating universe can produce the same phenomena as a rotating Earth. All they did is twist it to their advantage. Modern physicists are still aware of this, and some are even publishing on it today. There was a paper written in 2013, Department of Physics of Croatia, Mr. Popov, the dynamical description of the geocentric universe. Now, this is what he said. He said, using Mach's principle, we will show, now this is what he said, using Mach's principle, we will show that the observed motion of the Earth can just as well be accounted as the revolution of the universe around the fixed and centered Earth. This can be performed by postulating the existence of vector and scalar potentials caused by the simultaneous motion of the masses in the universe, including the distant stars. That's what he's saying. It's basically, it could be that the universe rotates around the center of the universe, which is the Earth. And that's where we leave this little scientific debate. And you know what's interesting about it is some of it, when you talk about the Coriolis effect, many people will say, well, the Earth can't be stationary because of the Coriolis effect. Well, what this showed was that it can be. It's just a matter of who you believe. And that's why Einstein was there. Einstein was there for one reason. That was to deflate Michelson-Morley. And at the time, the powers that be wanted you to believe in this universe that they've created, the globe Earth and the rest of it, for a reason. Now, I believe they want you to start thinking in terms of a flat Earth for a reason, and I think they will use that reason for their advantage in the end. And I want you to know that unless we can get enough funding to show otherwise. Maybe we'll never be able to be sure about anything, and they'll lead us by the nose as long as they choose to. Back tomorrow, Tuesday, on the Investigative Journal.